ISD students. Today for 7th grade, we're going to be looking at how did the things that led to the end of medieval Europe eventually lead to the culture of Renaissance Europe. There will be a lot of note-taking today during this video, so please feel free to pause anytime that you need to, and then you can start at your own pace. For now, on a piece of notebook paper, I'd like you to write down the following headers and make sure to leave space for taking some notes. We're going to look at effects on economy, effects on social life, and effects on institution. And through all of these things, we're going to look at what we're talking about with effects is the Black Death. So you can title this with the Black Death. The Black Death, what was it? It was a plague that spread across Europe in the 14th century that killed almost half of the European population. How did it lead to changes during the Renaissance? It lowered the demand for European goods during the Black Death, so farmers began to produce new and interesting food. If I were a student filling out my note sheet on effects of the Black Death, I would probably put this under economy. This is a change in the economy. So because we have a lower population, we have farmers producing lots more food. And so they are able to have a surplus, which means more food than there is a demand for. And so they can try new things and kind of experiment with what they are growing. Fewer workers were available, so the workers began to demand more freedom and higher wages. I would consider this to be an institutional effect or effect on institutions because this kind of deals with government. A lot of governments, and especially at this time, they are controlling the economy. And so the workers are starting to ask for more money. They feel like they deserve more money for their compensation of work. Serfs moved into the cities looking for work, which led to the growth of towns and the weakening of the feudal system. This is definitely a social effect of the Black Death. Over the past 2 days, we've talked about the feudal system and absolute monarchies and what that looks like. And so with the Black Death and with people moving into towns, we really see the feudal system kind of fall apart because the feudal system was based on that manor system that we talked about in lesson 1. And if you are no longer depending on kings or queens or lords or knights in order to live and to have land, you can kind of move wherever you want. And so we see the feudal system really disappear after the Black Death. And the weaker feudal system led to less powerful lords. So lords don't have as high of status as they once did. So today's kind of an introduction to the Renaissance, and that's going to be what a bulk of these lessons are going to be about that are remaining. So we're going to talk about that transition from Middle Ages, medieval times, into the Renaissance. What is the difference between Europe in the Middle Ages and Europe during the Renaissance? Go ahead and write down that header on your notes and kind of take some notes on some of the things that we're going to talk about on these next couple of slides. And remember, please pause the video at any time that you need to if you need more time to write down notes. The term Renaissance means rebirth. The European people had just gone through a really big, tumultuous time with the Black Death, and things were kind of depressing and people were kind of sad. And so the Renaissance is a time where they are going to have a rebirth of a lot of culture and an opportunity to be able to focus on the things that they love. So if there's a rebirth, it means that there has to be like a initial birth. The time that they're talking about that was so wonderful and great is part of what you've learned about in 7th grade earlier in the year is Greece and Rome. So talking about, Athens and how they had this emphasis on poetry and arts and theater, that was kind of lost after the fall of Rome and into the Middle Ages. And so there's a rebirth of interest in culture with the Renaissance. In the Middle Ages, there was a devotion to God, and everyone was part of the social system, so feudalism. So there was this really heavy emphasis on the Catholic Church. In class, you've talked about the role of the Catholic Church and the role that the Catholic Church played in society. During the Renaissance, there was a rebirth of classical learning and a belief in the individual human potential. So there was a little bit less focus on the church and a little bit less focus on the structure that the church brings. One of the events that really kicks off the Renaissance is the Hundred Years' War. This was a war between England and France over control of territory in present-day France. So I guess you could say, like, in the long run, France kind of came out the victor of that one, I suppose. It led to changes during the Renaissance because people became more patriotic and more devoted to the monarchies than to the Lord. If you think about your time in elementary school, and maybe your time is different, maybe this doesn't apply to you, I don't know. But when I think about my time in elementary school, I wasn't like super concerned with like our mascot. Like I just went to elementary school and it was fine. Like we were the Panthers, elementary school I went to, but we weren't like loyal to the mascot, if that means anything. But as we got older, as you start playing sports for your school and you start to get a little more involved, you might start to feel a little more connection to your school and to the community you're in. And so this war kind of brought people together and made them feel a little bit more patriotic and devoted to the monarchies than to the Lord. So it's kind of this unification of people. Unfortunately, in times of crisis, people really band together. So it's unfortunate at this time of crisis, but one of the positive things that can come out of crisis is people coming together and uniting and feeling stronger as a community. Monarchies of countries built huge armies with the taxes they collected, led to the reduced power of the nobles. So you're kind of eliminating the middleman here. So if you think about our social hierarchy, our social pyramid that we've talked about over the past couple days, we're kind of eliminating the people in between. And so people have an opportunity to rise up a social pyramid more. They're not stuck in their place for long periods of time. On your paper, I'd like you to kind of create a header. Trade increased during the Middle Ages. Trade and manufacturing grew between Europe and the East during the Middle Ages. So we see a lot of trade that's happening outside, kind of discovering, well, I say discovering, but starting to interact with a lot of civilizations in Asia, and being able to get things from places that they wouldn't have previously had access to. On your notes, if you would draw a table that looks like this, and again, feel free to pause the video whenever you need. You can write all this down and then press play, and I'll kind of explain what this means. So for society, which is kind of our large group of people, our community, on the left, we have town life during the Middle Ages. So pre-Renaissance, this is the time of the feudal system, of knights, etc. Towns were small because society was based on farming. And so with farming, you have large plots of land and you have individual farmers, but you don't have this bustling city. Independence is more of a city area, but if you go south or north, or if you go east in Missouri, you're going to come across a lot of farmland. If you've ever driven from Kansas City to Springfield, you've seen lots and lots of farmland. And so those cities are usually smaller. There are a lot of cities in Missouri that have, under 300 people because they are farm towns and there's just not as many people there. After the Black Death and after the Renaissance, towns are becoming based on business because they are ending the feudal system. People can move up in society. They can start their own businesses. They don't have to depend on their lords or nobles anymore to decide their fate. Again, you can pause the video and kind of write this down. Now we're going to look at power in the Middle Ages versus the Renaissance. Town life during the Middle Ages, the nobles had most of the power. So the lords owned the land and the knights protected. So there was kind of that obligation in the feudal system. You're going to obey me and follow my rules and follow my laws because I give you something. I think I could say for most people pretty confidently that if their jobs stopped paying them, they would probably stop showing up for work and find a job that did pay them. And so if the nobles no longer have any control over land, why would the peasants and serfs want to be loyal to them or want to follow them anymore? So after the Black Death and the dissolution of the feudal system, we have the Renaissance. So we have town life during the Renaissance. The middle class had the power and forced lords into business deals. So now, and we're going to kind of talk about this in the next slide, it's becoming more about, what kind of business you have and what kind of money you have, and less about what family you were born into. And the final comparison that we'll do between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance is in status. Again, feel free to pause this video and just jot down this chart. Town life in the Middle Ages is determined by birthright. So you were born into a family, and if you were born into a royal family, like congrats, you're royalty now. But if you were born into a peasant family, you're going to be a peasant for the rest of your life. There's really, really no transition. There's not a lot of upward mobility. Town life during the Renaissance is determined by wealth and ability. Okay, so if you are wealthy, which sometimes can be something that you're born into, you can move up. But also, if you have a really great ability to contribute, you could move up as well. So you weren't destined to be one thing for the rest of your life. What was similar between the two? So towns were centers for trade and shipping. So towns are still really important. Luxury goods could be bought in the towns. So people, even if you lived outside of a town, because not everyone lived in a town, you could still live outside. It was still kind of the epicenter of trade. Guilds, which are business groups, dominated the towns and contributed to building Christian buildings, cathedrals, sponsored parades, adopting patron saints. So while the church does not have as big of a role as it did in the Middle Ages, it does still have a role in the Renaissance. The spirit of the Renaissance. And this is really the big takeaway from the Renaissance, I think, and we're going to focus on for the next couple lessons. Ancient Greek and Roman knowledge was discovered by scholars during the Middle Ages, and they thought that they could use the knowledge to solve problems. Also, the Crusades, which we talked about in class, made Europeans want to learn about the world around them. So we have this, again, we just came from this Black Death, this time where people are really scared and they're really, it's just a lot. And they're emerging into the Renaissance, and they just want to fulfill their passion. They want to fulfill their joy. They want to do something that excites them now, because they've just lived through a really hard and difficult time. So how did it lead to changes during the Renaissance? And this is our last little bit of notes for today. This led to a fascination with classical art, the Roman idea of the human body, Roman ruins. Again, the Renaissance is a rebirth, which means that it has to go back to something. And so the something that it's going back to is Greece and Rome. Okay. This also brought about a belief in human potential. Each person can achieve great things. A focus on human achievement on Earth rather than in the afterlife. So, making the most of your time on Earth and enjoying the time that you have here on Earth. And finally, we have the introduction of humanism. And I would write down this humanist term because you're going to see it a lot over the next couple days. These are people who believe in the greatness of human potential. They devoted themselves to writing, learning as many subjects as possible, and solving questions of the universe and life. So again, the Black Death was a really not fun time. So now we have this, we want to be creative. We want to enjoy things. We want to pursue our passions. That's part of that humanism that is coming out after the Black Death. All right. Thanks for watching.